We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisades Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Dr. Stephen Leeb, founder of Leeb Capital Management and the author of China's Rise and the New Age of Gold, How Investors Can Profit from a Changing World. How are you today, Dr. Leeb?
I'm pretty good, Tom. For my age, I'm hanging in there, surviving.
That's always good. Always good to hear.
Although it's, conditions in today's world have made it very difficult. It really, and the more you realize what's going on, the tougher it becomes to, accept the kind of world that we're living in right now. But by the same token, and I use this word advisedly, pray for a better world. And I think it's possible. I haven't given up hope despite, things I never would believe that could happen in America or in the Western world as we know it, as we come to believe what the Western world is. What's happening today just defies any of those past beliefs. So yeah, given that, I'm doing fine.
As you and I were talking about before we hit record here, you really look at yourself as a researcher, always looking for the truth, right? And
that's exactly right.
I think that's never been a harder job to really separate the wheat from the chaff in today's day and age, right?
It never has. It's so much more difficult. It's like a quantum leap, metaphorically and literally. It's been for me, as an investment advisor. We don't take oaths, as I was telling you before, to do our best for our clients. But I've always believed that you should. Financial well-being is very, very important for people. And I always seek the truth with that in mind. And what I have learned, and I think I'm a pretty good researcher. I got a lot of degrees in a few years, but that's not necessary. It's a passion for research. I have 4 monitors in front of me. And what I've learned doesn't require any advanced degrees. It just requires a recognition that you cannot accept authority. That's what you have to start out with. And if you start out with that as a core belief of yours, I'm not saying to ignore authority. Some authorities you accept, but a lot of authorities you don't. This country, since and I hate, I know I sound a little quacky when I say that, since we got off the gold standard, this country has gone downhill, and it's become ever more noticeable. It's accelerated. And I believe that the reason, or, there are a lot of reasons the gold standard may have affected us, but if I can continue in this vein, because it really does relate to commodities and everything else. Prior to the gold, when we were on the gold standard, we had to create our economic growth by productivity. We had to earn it. We had to come up with inventions. We had to improve our way of life. When we went off the gold standard and shortly thereafter, basically, we could print as much money as we wanted. That became possible, and no one could reject us for it. The gold standard held our feet to the fire always. And basically, it was Vietnam, guns and butter, that led to the end of the gold standard. I think we still had a chance up to the last day to kind of try and reverse things, but we didn't take it. And since then, money has replaced productivity, invention, all the good things that make growth possible with money. Basically, we have come to believe that the only solution to any problem was money. And that is what we have practiced. And it has led, and you've come to believe, you have to believe it now, I think, that there are problems that money cannot solve. And we have finally, I mean, I thought for about the last 12, maybe 20 years that, we would reach a certain point that we could not solve problems anymore with money. But it wasn't apparent to me how blind we would become to this particular situation. But now, as I look over to my right, I'm looking at Bloomberg, and I'm looking at the price of the Russian ruble. And I see that the Russian ruble has outperformed every currency since they entered Ukraine. Initially, there was a major fall in the Russian ruble, but now it is at, I think, 5-year highs against, or close to, against the dollar and the euro, and a 7-year high against the yen. Resource scarcities are not a problem that can be attacked with monetary solutions. We have thrown every sanction we could think of against Russia. And despite Jan Psaki, I mean, there's a recording of her, a million of her, walking out of our early press conference after we sanctioned Russia saying, and look, we've destroyed their economy. Well, suddenly, at first we thought we had, because the ruble crashed. But now I think that we've destroyed Europe's economies and we've done a lot of destruction. But Russia right now is unlikely to have a severe, it's extremely unlikely they will have a severe recession. And in fact, today, when I looked at the ruble, I saw it way down, not way down, but I saw it down. And I said, what's happened? And what's happened is the ruble has gotten so strong as a currency that the Russians decided they had to weaken it because it was making it hard for them to export. We are in the world right now, and we obviously do not accept it, that money is no longer the solution. We need to cooperate with people, including China and Russia. And I'm no China apologist. I do never want to live under autocracy, but I'm willing to cooperate with autocracy if it means saving the world. And that's literally the situation we're at right now. If we don't learn to cooperate, it's going to be too late to cooperate. And we're going to run out of basic commodities that places like Russia, countries like Russia have. And I've realized that, well, look, here's another data point. And the immediate data point is ruble. And that really brings it home really, really clearly, because these sanctions have so badly backfired on us. It's hard to believe the damage that we've done to Europe, and what Europe is suggesting as a workaround, solar panels that take 20 years to pay back. I mean, yes, solar is great. It's wonderful, but it needs at least a 15-year lead time. And we're going to use your plans to use solar to replace an immediate problem. I mean, Germany has been working on solar for the last 20 years. They've believed in, basically, I don't know if they believe in climate change as much as they believe in resource scarcity. It's resource scarcity. It's not climate change that's really wreaking this destruction. And I call it a destruction in Europe right now as we speak. It's a very, very serious situation. And as you know, right now we're making it much worse, not better. A longer term data point, as an investment advisor that I have been mindful of, at least to some extent, not as much as maybe I should have, is that gold is necessary. It's a vital asset. And over the last 22 years, gold has outperformed every other major asset, like the S&P 500 total return. Gold has sharply outperformed it by 200 percentage points. I mean, it's maybe quadrupled relative to doubled, or gone up 5-fold now, relative to going up 3-fold. People have lost out. If you go to a financial advisor in this country, and this really is remarkable because it shows how much this country has changed. If you go to a doctor, what would you think of that doctor? If he recommended to you, you have, let's say, a bad heart, you're getting out of breath and you think something's wrong. And he said, don't worry about it, but just do this. Every morning, take a tablespoon or 2 or 3 tablespoons of Crisco, the highly saturated fat, and wash it down with high fructose corn syrup, meaning like have a couple of Cokes with it, and do that every morning. And you won't have to worry, you'll get better. Well, you'll also die. But this is I'm exaggerating, but this is sort of the situation you're in today.
Either
with the
way, your
financial
problem is
world.
going to be solved, right?
Yeah, that's one way of solving it. And the other way, a comparable way is not tell people about gold as being a strong currency, and not being aware that commodities have become ever more critical to today's world. You're not going to have to worry. And basically, this is the path we've been following. The only assets you should invest in are financial assets. And yeah, I think some financial assets are very, very good. I can truthfully say I recommend them right now, but not forever, and not very many of them. But gold and other commodities, if you plan to leave this world in any reasonably quick time frame, I'm old enough that, this is important to me. And my brother is. And, if you're planning for your progeny or the world's progeny, you've got to have gold. There's nothing else that really is assured about lasting the prices that we have created in this country right now. And it is a crisis. Make no mistake about it. We are living in utterly critical times. And if we don't make the right decisions, and right now, we are going to run into problems that are not solvable and will basically, doom us in some way or other. I don't want to give you worst case scenario. Well, obviously the worst case scenario right now is a nuclear war, but I'm not even convinced that, you want to die in a quick period of time, or do you want to die in a very painful way over a long period of time? We have got to cooperate very, very quickly, or we're going to be faced with the kind of situation Europe is being faced with today. And they're going to realize it they already realize it, that they're going to start freezing in the winter, and that there's no getting around this at this point. This is actual truth. And I wish I could change it. I wish I could wave a magic wand to make people see that this is so obvious. It's in front of us all. You don't have to have any advanced degrees. You don't have to have anything. You can be convinced of it. None of my advanced training, the only reason I cite that is because people accept that as credibility. It really isn't, though I did exceptionally well in school. It has nothing to do with what's true right now. In fact, if someone comes to me with a PhD and wants a job, I will look at them and really question them much harder than someone who comes to me and doesn't have much academic training, but is sort of saying to me, hey, aren't we running, what's happening with oil? The person that works in my building is a doorman, and he's educated. He came from Europe, I think Montenegro, no, not Montenegro, one of the European communities, a Slavic community. And he's saying, what's going on in America right now? Why am I paying so much for energy? Why am I paying so much for food? And I say, Dion, but what do you think of Putin? And what do you think of what's going on in the Ukraine? And, it's people like this that wake me up. He said, well, I don't understand why the US is supporting Nazis in the Ukraine, because Nazis are my enemy. They're not my friend. And this, I'm quoting him. And basically you do the research, and it's available on Google. You have to look, and you realize that this country is really off the tracks right now. And people like my brother, I don't know if he'll ever speak to me again for, telling him, but I've said to him, here's where to look. Here's where the facts are. Here's where you see the strong evidence. I have a picture taken from Fox News, okay? And Fox News does have people on their show that are at least see the truth a little bit clearer than others. And Fox News is very new to me. years ago, I was very happy watching MSNBC every night. I'll admit it. But at some point, I came to believe I wasn't watching what was true. And I'm old enough to change, and I'm very happy about that. I mean, that I'm at this age, I'm still able to change and change completely, and I have. But I have this picture, I don't want to get distracted, of Fox News, the morning shows carrying on about how horrible the war is in the Ukraine, and doing it and showing some of the horror that has happened, but not happened actually, in Mariupol. And you see in the background that there is a sign saying that this pamphlet is being passed out by the Azov Parliament, or the Azov Brigade, which is fighting for Ukraine. Azov, I don't think these people realize, represents a Nazi group. They are that's who's fighting for Ukraine, and it's right in front of you. Fox is advertising it, not knowing exactly what they're saying. And I took a photograph because it was on YouTube, and because you have to take photographs of this to convince yourself that it's happening. I mean, it's very, very hard to come to believe what's happening in this world and how it has to affect your investment decisions. And that's what I'm coming back to. I mean, most of our technologies in this country right now are IT, information technology. How much of our technology is, I'll say IM or TM, technology related to materials? This is what we need to be focusing on. This is what China's been focusing on, material technologies. We're not. We're focusing on information technologies because that's where the money is, getting it from the consumer. 70% of this economy is driven by the consumer, and that's information technology. It's Facebook, it's Google, this is their blood and guts, and this is the blood and guts of our financial institutions right now. And it is a catastrophic mistake. And when I say catastrophic mistake, I'm quoting people like John Matlack, who was John Kennedy's ambassador to the, or was it? Yes, I think he was his ambassador to the Soviet Union, the last ambassador to the Soviet Union, and was there during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm quoting people like, I think his name was Kenyon. He died back in 2005, but testified, he was regarded as the greatest foreign policy advisor of the 20th century, testifying before Congress. Matlack is still alive. He's in his 90s, testified before Congress that this kind of thing would happen if we allowed the eastward expansion of the Ukraine. That doesn't mean Russia's right in attacking and killing. No, it doesn't mean it at all. But it means that we're wrong in what we have done up to this point in many ways. And we've been told this many, many times, yet we've persisted with it. And we've persisted with it to such a point that basically Putin had been faced with a situation for a long time with troops on his border. And what John Matlack pointed out, talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, is John Kennedy had to fight his entire Joint Chiefs of Staff to prevent a first strike because we were so terrified by, the Joint Chiefs were so terrified by what was happening in Cuba. And eventually, it took a young president. I was never a Kennedy fan, never, until I started looking into this. And I actually heard about John Matlack on the Amy Goodman show, who's as liberal as you can be. You cannot find someone more liberal than Amy Goodman. And she had Matlack as a guest. I mean, she's liberal, but she's also fair and honest. And she had John Matlack as a guest, knowing full well what he would say. And he said that, in congressional testimony in the 90s, before Clinton got to work on, taking us further east, he said before Congress that this would be a catastrophic mistake. It would be the same mistake that Russia made with respect to us by putting nukes in Cuba, because it would bring NATO to the borders of Russia. And that's exactly what we've done. And Putin accepted it for for quite a while. But when it became clear, again, Azov was fighting these Russian enclaves in the Ukraine, and he said denazification. At first, I thought he was crazy. I'd be very honest. I thought this is just Russian propaganda, denazification. What is he talking about? But then you start thinking about the Ukraine, Tom, and you realize a quarter of the Holocaust took place in the Ukraine. I'm giving you facts that people can look up for themselves. A quarter of the Holocaust, 1.5 million Jewish people were killed. Kiev right now has street names after Nazi sympathizers. They have, and also people that killed a lot of Poles and a lot of Russians during the Second World War. Kiev has street names after these people. I mean, at least Russia, in all the horror they've done, they had the good sense to change the name of Stalingrad, which is where the critical battle of the Second World War took place, that saved us. I mean, really, they won the Second World War with the Battle of Stalingrad. I mean, read Life and Fate. It's one of the great pieces of fiction of the 20th century, and they make this clear. And one of the highlights of that is a woman writing to her son as she goes off to the Ukrainian death camps. Now, there were no Ukrainian death camps. That is true. But Ukraine executed and buried in mass graves 1.5 million Jews. That's the semi-official count, and you can verify that on Ruble. And who knows how many Poles and other people that were innocent, other Slavic people. I mean, other people that were not part of the Aryan race, so to speak, are buried in these same mass graves that exist in the Ukraine today. And that's who we are. That's who's been fighting the Russians for the last 8 years up to their attack. These same descendants of these people, either spiritual descendants or actual descendants of Nazis, have been conducting this. This is all fact right now. There's no, I wish I could challenge it. I want to challenge it. I don't even believe Zelensky is a bad guy. I accept the fact that he's a quarter Jewish or half Jewish or Jewish, completely Jewish. I'm sorry about saying even, splitting hairs. He tried to stop this. He actually tried to stop the slaughter that's going on in the eastern part of the country. And he was just told by Azov and others, take a hike. We're not paying any attention to you. He broke down and said, I'm the president of this country. I was elected. Stop the fighting. And they refused to listen. We know this. And there's no mistaking that this is true. I'm sorry to be dramatic about this, but I think that if you care about your own welfare and your own children's or progeny's welfare, you have to recognize that there is something incredibly wrong in this world. And whatever you might think of China, whatever you might think of the Soviet Union, you'll get no argument from me. The last thing I ever want is an autocracy over me. The last thing I want is a communist government over me. And what's going on in China right now is horrific, but not so much horrific what they're doing to the Uyghurs. What they're doing in Shanghai, I believe, is kind of horrific. There's no need to be doing it. They know full well there's no need to be doing it, but I think they're doing it deliberately. But anyway, that's not a kind of country I want to live in. But at the same time, I recognize that if we're not willing to cooperate with China, not willing to cooperate with Russia, we are headed to purgatory one way or the other. It might be a nuclear war, or it might be just running out of critical commodities, critical natural resources. One or the other is going to happen to us. And it's urgent that we wake up. And it's urgent that people do in the meantime to keep themselves solvent. Yeah, I mean, it's okay to own some tech stocks. I wouldn't own any Amazon. I wouldn't own any Facebook. I wouldn't own any Google. I wouldn't own anything involved in social media. But I would own a lot of material stocks, and I would own, legitimate semiconductor stocks that are going to be critical for developing the kinds of technologies that will take us out of this mess, the kinds of technologies we ran away from after we went off the gold standard. Every invention that we see today that China is using to full effect is a result of all our work in this country that came out of Bell Labs And Bell Labs went the way of the dodo. Basically, I've come to realize this recently, when AT&T was broken up, it would have been very easy. And while we broke up AT&T, I think there was good reasons. They were a monopoly, not, even more of a monopoly than Amazon is today. Amazon's a monopoly, at least when it comes to books. But AT&T, the original AT&T, had, they controlled all our communications in effect. And they were a monopoly, and they should have been broken up. But we should have realized that part of this monopoly was Bell Labs. And Bell Labs was basically funded as AT&T. AT&T was controlled by the US government. They were basically a government-controlled monopoly. And that allowed them to fund Bell Labs. And Bell Labs produced everything you can think of, from the transistor to the integrated circuit, to the internet, to the laser, to you name it, superconductivity. I mean, I'm not going to take all your time, because you can, learn this. And you can learn that Bell Labs was destroyed in effect when the investment bankers who were breaking up AT&T decided to pair Bell Labs, instead of pairing it with one of the baby bells, which everybody knows would be around forever, because they would have not full monopolies of the country, but they would have monopolies of their territory. They paired it with a company called Lucent. Now, if you don't remember Lucent, it was part of the breakup that represented a very competitive company, a company that was going to compete with everybody else in this country in terms of providing the products that we would need to maintain our communications. Well, long story short, Lucent went bankrupt and Bell Labs ceased to exist. And now it's part of a Scandinavian company. And ironically, in our efforts to get around these Chinese products by Huawei, which may be a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not taking a position on what we're doing with Huawei. I have no idea what they're doing. I know what they claim they're doing. And, I'm inclined to believe them, because I know a lot of other countries are using them. And I know that the Chinese don't need Huawei to hack us. And so why take the chance? But on the other hand, I could be wrong on that, totally wrong. But I'm sure not wrong on the fact that we're now relying on, the companies that we've said, we're going to rely on for 5G or whatever are Ericsson and Nokia. One of the two, I don't remember, now controls what's left of Bell Labs. To say more, I don't need to. We don't have any of this technology in our country today. Bell Labs still managed to, more or less keep up with it. And yet, for the sake of a higher payday, our investment bankers got rid of Bell Labs. They put it in a situation where it could not possibly survive. I don't think they did that intentionally, incidentally. It just was the course they took because it maximized their personal gain. It maximized the money they made. And we've gone, as a result, and I'll just sum up what I'm saying, you can ask me any questions. We've gone from a country that was dedicated to productivity, dedicated to technology, dedicated to its citizens, to a country that doesn't give a darn about their citizens, to a country that is not involved in the kind of technology that will provide the resources that we'll need in the future to survive. It's happened. And now everything has hit the road. The rubber has hit the road, as they say. There are other expressions I could use, but I won't, because I don't know what's allowed. Maybe this is not allowed, what I'm saying. But fortunately, everything I'm mentioning right now, you can verify yourself and still verify it for yourself. And I'm not talking about, you don't need anything more than an 8th grade education to understand completely what's going on in this world. And you can find it on Google. And it's eye-opening. It's so eye-opening. Again, I'll repeat. At my age, it's very hard to so switch. I mean, I'll confess that I never voted for a Republican in my life until, very, very recently, until I was past 70. But right now, I mean, my belief system has so changed. And, the only thing I can take, the only reason that it's changed and I've been able to change is I never have been willing to accept authority. It doesn't mean that I reject authority, but it means that if someone tells you something, you question it. I don't care who the authority is. And you can question it in today's world. The one good thing about IT is that you can question it by looking up Google, and you can find exactly what I'm saying, and you can verify everything that I've said so far. And I'll sort of, I'll leave off there, but this, I don't have to really say more than people have to be involved in real assets, period. It's that simple. Financial assets are not the ticket for human survival. In fact, they're a ticket for human destruction at this point. We will end up destroying ourselves if we follow our current course. And Europe's learning this lesson the very hard way as we speak right now, Tom. It really is true. And, that's basically how we stand right now in this country. We're at a crossroads. This is probably the most critical time human civilization has ever faced. And the evidence is in front of all of us, and you can get it. If you think that I sound wacky, I have a water bottle in front of me and, the way I'm dressed, or, someone said, I think on one blog I was on, well, I had some supplements in front of me. Well, how can you believe a guy that has supplements in front of me? Well, because a lot of those supplements, but they call them drugs. They're not they are drugs, but they're supplements. A lot of those supplements are more important to your health than let's say a lot of drugs that you're going to be prescribed, including mRNA vaccines. I mean, really and truly, I think I'm alive today by virtue of, something hereditary. I mean, I got the mRNA vaccine. I didn't, had not read the hard studies. Look for a Danish study on it. And look at how, much money Pfizer has made. Billions and billions and billions of dollars prescribing or, with a vaccine that, really is not a good vaccine. There are good vaccines out there. The AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, I think, are very good vaccines. And I wish I had known what I know today, because I would have, if I had to, I would have traveled to Britain to get the AstraZeneca vaccine, or would have waited for a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There's that much difference. But we've been recommending in this country, basically the mRNA, the Johnson & Johnson, not Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Hard to find the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in this country. But anyway, those supplements, my point is, maybe one reason that when I look at my profile, I have a very good cholesterol profile, and I attribute it to supplements, nothing that I've taken from, nothing that's ever been prescribed by a doctor. Put it that way. I mean, it's people have to learn to question, but I'm getting carried away with the whole thing, and I don't blame myself. Stop me, Tom.
I understand that you're very passionate, and that's why I enjoy our conversations together here. And there's obviously a lot to dig in there. So, to your point about resource scarcity, you recently wrote an article where you pointed out that the U.S. was only self-sufficient in 15 out of 64 commodities, which is less than 25%. So how focused should the US be at the moment on fixing this number? Isn't it insanely, short-sighted to think that the previous era of globalization and just-in-time inventories will continue indefinitely?
It's I don't have a word for how crazy it is. And I didn't realize how crazy it was. Back in 2009 or 2011, when my last book came out, Red Alert, I talked about, which was also in China, I talked about rare earths and how vital rare earths were to everything that we're doing in modern society. They're critical. And we don't have them right now. We have one mine, and that mine, this is crazy. I thought that mine was further advanced than it is. And they're finally mining. That mine had been around for many, many years. It was called Molycorp originally, and now it's called MP. I know that's the stock symbol for it. And I was ready to recommend it. But then I realized that they get the ore, but they have to send the ore to China in order to be processed, because we don't have any refining capabilities. Now, I did not realize that in the 1990s, we did have refining capabilities. And President Clinton, This is all, I mean, I had to do this research because someone else pointed this out to me. I didn't realize any of this. I realized how short-sighted, we're being right now. But I thought that MP was, kind of an answer. I didn't realize that we still had to send this stuff off to China. And it's not unusual. I mean, I guess in retrospect, it's not surprising because I had done this research. I realized that it's impossible to get an engineering degree in rare earths. We don't offer rare earth engineering as a specialty or even a subspecialty or even a subspecialty in any major school in this country. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But I was surprised when someone asked me to do a little research on them, on rare earths. And I learned that in the 1990s, we were the only place to go to for rare earths. Refining capacity, I mean, now the supply chain is really extended. But in the 80s, in the 90s rather, we were the supply chain. It was Bill Clinton who sold everything to China, basically without approval and basically for a song. I mean, I think he may have gotten $50 million, the country may have gotten. Maybe they got $100 million. You know what that franchise is worth today? You can't count the amount. It's like priceless. If you're sitting in front of a computer, you need rare earths. One thing that really gives me pause at night, I'll tell you, if I stay up at night and worry, it's worried about our military. Because again, there are books right around written by serving colonels that are serving, or generals, that are serving in our military that say without access to rare earths, which I think we still get from China, our military would be as functional as they would have been in 1979. We go back, I'm not making this up. I wish I were making this up, Tom, I swear, but I'm not. That's how dependent we are on China for our military. Our computers are similarly dependent on rare earths. They're the most powerful magnets that you can create come from rare earths. And without the supply chain to make these magnets, our technology, but in particular our military technology, I don't want Russia and China to be way ahead of us, but I can't rule out the fact that they are right now. I hope they're not. I hope we have enough stockpiled. I hope we've been sensible enough to do that, but I can't promise. I wish I don't have evidence that we are. And that scares the daylights out of me. It really does. I'm an American. I want this country to thrive for the next 150 years, but we can't if we don't have a military. Let me just say this. When China launched a recent hypersonic missile that went around the world and struck at a particular spot within a few kilometers of their target after circling the world, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in this country, General Milley, said this should be a Sputnik moment. And that was kind of deleted, but I think you can still find that reference. And he said, no, because the Sputnik moment represents the time when we realized Russia had a satellite and we took up arms, literally, and developed the wherewithal, the technology to go to the moon within a decade. That's what we were capable of in the 50s and 60s, when this country was truly great. Today, you can't even mention Sputnik moment. But, the fact that he said it was upsetting in itself, but it's really upsetting if you realize that you need rare earths to create this kind of hypersonic missile. So I'll leave it there. But everything I'm saying, again, I'm quoting General Milley, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who I think was forced to take back that comment. So I'll leave it there.
You mentioned China, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but you've been speculating recently on why they've locked down their economy so hard again, and really, in order to achieve zero COVID. Share more with us about why you think that they've done that.
Okay, let me say this first about China, and the propaganda that you see in this place. You see a lot of propaganda about what they've done to their Uyghurs in the Northwest. Some of that may be true. I mean, again, I don't want to live in China. I think they would do anything they had to protect their country. That's where China is. We've had our own problems with ISIS, and they had their problems too. And their problems were they had a border with, a country that was harboring a lot of angry Muslims. And not Muslims are good people, generally speaking, but they're bunch of angry Muslims, and they were in Afghanistan. Once their border was shut down, China has no need to shut in Uyghurs. And so that's going away. But getting back to Shanghai, I want you to realize that China will do anything that's necessary to protect their country, including, and I think they did imprison Uyghurs. I don't think they did anything near what we said that they did, but they did bad things to Uyghurs. We did bad things to the Japanese during World War II. And, I can't blame us, for having these internment camps, et cetera, in the course of a war. But we're not at war with China. And, and China doesn't view themselves at war with us, but they were at war with radical Muslims. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, if you go back to the New York Times 5 or 6 years ago, not today, you'll see evidence of this. 800 Chinese killed in riot, organized by, terrorists. And those terrorists were coming from Afghanistan. So they did what they could. And they went way too far, in my opinion. I mean, there was no need to go to take those draconian steps with these camps, et cetera. They almost surely exist, but not the killing, not the castration, not all of that. They still have as many mosques in Xinjiang as mosques per capita, which is where Muslims pray, are prevalent all through that province right now. They're as prevalent in that province as they are in this country. Okay, I know that's not what you want to hear. Shanghai is a more interesting story. China is a communist. They're socialists. They're not really communists in the sense that they're horrible totalitarians, but they're definitely a socialist economy, and they don't really have any love lost, particularly for the elites. This country is run right now by corporations, corptocracies. You've seen China look at this and crack down on their corporations. I'm not really for that at all, what they did to Alibaba, et cetera. But in Shanghai and Beijing, that's where you see the elites. That's where you see the very, very wealthy Chinese. And for them to crack down on these particular cities is not a big deal to them. I mean, they would never do this, in my opinion, if you had, lesser established people. If you had, the equivalent to our blue or white collar, low-level white collar workers, if they populated all of Shanghai and Beijing, they would never, in my opinion, count on shutting it down. I mean, they're shutting down Shanghai right now because of, I don't know, have there been 100 or 200 deaths reported? Does anyone know what the normal death rates are? I mean, it's insane. I mean, what they've done.
But what do you think what do you think the purpose of them doing that is? Like, obviously, it seems like trying to achieve zero COVID seems kind of a misguided goal.
Yeah, it's totally misguided. And everybody is coming up and believing China is weak. They're believing Xi is ready to, a coup is waiting around the corner for Xi as a result of his doing this. There's two reasons. One is, if you go back to Confucianism, China wasn't practicing this for a while, but it's a cliche now. Show your weaknesses, hide your strengths, okay? China right now is not only showing their weaknesses, they're magnifying it. One clear example of this, which is in the other direction, China right now has an exascale supercomputer industry going. We're trying to develop our first exascale computer. We haven't done it. China has not let anyone know officially that they have an exascale computer. We found out about it accidentally by looking at one of their articles that they published on another type of computation in which they referred to an exascale computer. And it turns out we've done enough investigation to realize this is a real thing, though they haven't admitted it. If you go back to the list of the 500 fastest computers from years past, you'll find China number one, and then they were number two, number three. But, everybody was looking at the next generation of supercomputers. China achieved that about 2 years ago and never said a word about it. In the past, they would brag about it. But they realize right now that they are at war. And when you're at war, and I'm not talking about a hot war. I mean, Taiwan is another example. The last thing China wants to do is invade Taiwan. They would be short-circuiting themselves. I mean, they're very dependent on Taiwan for a lot of stuff they use, semiconductors, advanced semiconductors. In fact, some people believe that, and I think it's credible, that these supercomputers that they've developed the chips probably came from Taiwan, despite the sanctions. No one's going to try and prove it, because if we slap these sanctions on Taiwan, we would shut down our own semiconductor industry. So dependent on others. But okay, why is she doing this in Shanghai? The busiest port in the world, the busiest port for commerce in the world is the Shanghai port. That's where you start. And you're saying, for whatever their motivations, China wants to slow things down right now. And they realize how strong their economy is. Now, there are a couple of reasons for wanting to do that. One, it will help Russia and will help us realize that commodities and natural resources are utterly critical, because they will see that they cannot sanction Russia. They will see the West. This will make the West see that perhaps this is one reason. I think it's a possibility. No one knows. I don't have access to anything, so I'm speculating now. Nothing I've said up to now is speculation. I don't think. It's stuff you can verify. This you're not going to verify for obvious reasons. And this is just coming to me now as I speak. I mean, I could give you a lot of reasons why China might want to do this. One reason is it makes clear that a country like Russia, which we really regard as rogue, and Putin is really, you can make a credible case he's crazy. And he's a member of the KGB. There's no denying that. He came from the KGB. He's ruthless. He, in some ways, is a sociopath. Yet the world has reached a point that without Russia, we basically face an existential crisis. Right now, it's food and energy that we're short of. I mean, if you can figure out a way that we can live without food and energy, then you don't have to worry about Russia or Putin. But there is no way around it. And what we have found, Ruble going through the roof, et cetera, is that Europe right now is in a total mess. They have no access to energy. It's going to take them another 10 years to replace the oil, at least 10 years to replace the oil and the wheat that's coming out of Russia and the Ukraine, et cetera. They don't have any around the street from it. Ukraine has the most fertile soil in the world, period. It's soil that you can plant. They say you can plant a stick into it and the stick will grow into a tree. I mean, it's that kind of soil. Well, China may want us to realize, hey, America, money is not your answer right now. America, your answer right now is technology and cooperation. And unless you agree to cooperate with us, we're all in the same boat together. We're not going to survive either without these resources and without the technologies and without the ingenuity. We accept the fact that it was your ingenuity that developed all the stuff that we're using. We've just refined it. We've made it better. I mean, they wouldn't have half the stuff if we hadn't sent a Chinese scientist that was here and happy here in the McCarthy era, when we had this anti-communist thing going and, a lot of people were blacklisted, et cetera. Well, one of the most successful scientists that we had was Chinese. He was born in China, came here, got his degrees at MIT, et cetera. He was utterly brilliant, but he was Chinese, and we sent him back to China. Lo and behold, that started part of their revolution in technology. They were able to, thanks to the scientists, recreate a lot of what was happening in Bell Labs, et cetera, et cetera. But not completely. A lot of it they've probably stolen from us, in the meantime. But the point is, we've done nothing. There's not a supply chain in the world that we're not dependent on others for. And like you said about commodities, what I wrote about, we take them for granted. What China is doing, basically, they can afford to do this. I mean, she can absolutely afford to do this. There's maybe 60 million out of 1.4 billion people that live in Shanghai. His power base are those people that are not elite, unlike this country. So he can afford to shut in the Shanghai harbor, and he can afford to do a lot of things that make us really struggle and realize how important China has become. more as a cooperator than as an adversary. And how can we realize it more clearly? When you can't afford, people more and more are going to have problems affording food and energy. This may be one of the reasons that China is doing it. Now, a more cynical reason, I mean, China is anything but, a good guy in this. They may want to show the world, they may have given up on the US, and I hope this is not the case. And they just may want to convince Asia that they are the big man on the block right now, because they can shut in growth anytime they want, and they can, by opening up the economy, really opening it up by, forgetting about these silly COVID rules. Omicron is the only virus that they had trouble with. I think I read an article last night. I think the death rate from Omicron, I mean, it's negligible. The only people affected are, that could be affected, and even for them it's negligible, are people over 60. I'm not getting a vaccine for it, and believe me, I'm over 60. I'm not worried about it. And there's no way China's COVID or statistics are ever going to end up anywhere near as bad as any of those in Western countries. There's no way. It's impossible. If worst cases on Omicron are not going to result in that, she's in no problem. There's no problem associated, despite what you hear from even Fudan in a college or university in China, that there'll be all this craziness if they didn't follow zero COVID. Nonsense. There will be no craziness. This is it's kind of a cynical way, a ruthless way on their part. I mean, something that it's impossible for me to approve of, but maybe it's necessary to both convince us that they're essential, that resources that we've forgotten all about, that we've now taken for granted, are now essential again, utterly essential. And we've got to get on our horse and start developing them. And if we develop them in a cooperative way, I think China still does want to cooperate with us. We still produce great scientists in this country. It's just that they're not organized, and they're focused on just doing corporate research, which is research that's going to pay off in the next 6 months, not the next 10 years. There's not a corporation in this country that thinks 10 years ahead like China does. They think 10 and 20 years ahead. If our scientists in this country were dedicated to thinking 10 years ahead, as Bell Lab scientists were when this country was great, we would be very, very helpful in solving these problems. I think China recognizes that they can't solve it by themselves, or they're going to try. They're going to try very, very hard, but they need to cooperate. We need to cooperate, Tom, or else we're just not going to have an America again. We went from the greatest economy on the face of the earth, and I mean, Canada and America, I mean, following similar courses, to an economy that is totally unrecognizable from what it was half a century ago when we were on the gold standard. When we lost all the discipline, money became the only driver in this economy. 3 months was long term, because that's when the next quarterly report came out. And we've created a situation in this country. Well, I'm not going to go into it now because we're probably running out of time. But you have a kind of vicious circle where our big corporations are dependent on a consumer, and debt levels for this consumer continue to grow. And, we're going to have a catastrophe one way or the other. We're going to have a catastrophe because of all the debt, and eventually consumers are going to go, not be able to afford what we're selling them. And then what happens to all these major corporations that are, now so powerful? Amazon recently shut down stores. That's the first time that's ever happened. It didn't happen in the course of the pandemic. Now they have shut down stores because our consumers are running out of the ability to buy goods. Because of their debt levels, et cetera. We've become so fractured between haves and have-nots. Capitalism is great because it does allow people that contribute more to rise to the top, but they don't have to rise to the top to the extent that they control all the books in the country, like Jeff Bezos does. 75% of the books, he can ban any book he wants. He can basically define how we think right now in this country, Jeff Bezos. This is crazy. And it's going to stop on its own, either because consumer debt gets too high, or because we run out of resources, or a combination of both. Mm-hmm. This is where we're headed right now, unless we wake up. And I don't mind being the 100th monkey, if you know what that that proverb is. Mm-hmm. It takes 100 monkeys to, really start a war or start a revolution of sorts. I don't mind if I never get credit for it at my age. I just want to get the point across that we've got to change, and hopefully we have enough time left. I can't promise that, but I think we still do. And I still have not given up on the American dream. In fact, unfortunately, it's non-Americans that are now achieving that American dream. Elon Musk. I mean, he's become the richest man in the world, which is a joke, because you're only rich because the stock market says you're rich, and the stock market could, crash, and then suddenly you're not. But Elon Musk has become a very successful guy in terms of EVs, et cetera. But where did he make his money? You know where he became the richest guy in the world? After he went into Shanghai and his open factories in Shanghai. And that allowed him to expand his empire into China. China has no problem with that, into Europe, et cetera. And now, he has a workaround in Shanghai so that he could get his factories running again, because China is very happy to have EVs being produced. So, he's the American dream. And the companies that are being run by Chinese, companies like NVIDIA, AMD, even Microsoft is run by an Indian who was educated. Primary education was in India. Taiwan Semiconductor from Taiwan. That's what I was talking about earlier. AMD is run by a Taiwanese. NVIDIA, as I said, was run by a Taiwanese. I can't think of other companies. Micron, most successful memory company in the world, went from a bankrupt company, nearly bankrupt, to now one of the most successful memory companies in the world, semiconductors, run by, I believe, an Indian, someone educated in India, Asia. We have all these abilities. There was a time when we were number one in math and everything. We can do it again. We just have to acquire that most important ability of all, which is to think for ourselves. And I honestly believe, and I'll just sort of leave it here, that if you don't have something really sacred in your life, this most important belief, this most important skill is going to be very, very hard to come by. You're going to be too prone to accept whoever your authority figure is. And this means if you're, extreme right, you might accept this guy as your authority figure. If you're extreme left, a woke, you might accept this person. No, you be your own authority. Everybody is smart enough to be that. I have no special skills, Tom. I really don't. I went through graduate school, and basically I got through so fast because I think I ignored the bureaucracy. Really, that was my great skill. I figured out a way of getting around the authorities in a way. I worked hard, very, very hard. But what I'm saying, everybody has these skills at their disposal. The last thing I want to see on a resume today, and I never thought I would be saying this, is someone that went to an Ivy League school. Even worse would be someone that went to an Ivy League school and graduated summa cum laude. I won't look at them because I know that they are just going to accept everything that they are told. It's a rare exception to find people with this kind of education in today's world, in America today, not in China, but in America today, that, will think for themselves and be educated by an American university. It's tragic. It's just, I just can't believe it. I think I'm living in a surreal world. I think I was telling you before, and I'll leave it at this for people that think that everything I'm saying is nonsense. Do your own research on rare earths and find out how important they are. And what you'll find out is that our military is probably 1979 level, unless we have full access to rare earths, and we get that full access from China. And that's all factual. Look at the annual report of MP, the company, Molycorp Materials, or whatever they call themselves. MP is the stock symbol. Just go to Google and search that and realize what they have to do to get rare earths. They have to send the ore to China. That's just one way. But the only thing I've speculated on in what I've told you today is, again, why is Shanghai being shut down? It's not because it has to be shut down. I don't think that's speculation. There's no reason to shut it down. None. No medical reason for shutting it down, despite what you hear. Every reason suggests China wants to prove a point. And I hope part of that point is to convince us, as I'm repeating myself again and again, that it's critical for this world to come together and cooperate. We don't have to give up our sovereignty to do it. We can maintain our individuality. China, will accept that about us. They know that. They know where their technologies have come from. They're not blind to anything. And they want to cooperate with us, but we want to destroy them. And in the process, as what's happening in Russia is convincing us, should have convinced us by now, we're destroying ourselves. It's totally backfired in terms of our allies and Europe, et cetera. I mean, just all you need to do, guys, and if any investment advisors are listening to me and they sort of bought into the only assets are financial assets, no. Not true. You can mix them, but you've got to have hard assets in your portfolio. It's the only thing that you can truly count on long-term at this point. I hope it's a different story 20 or 30 years from now, but it's going to take that long to get on the right track. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of money made if we make the right decision. So I want to leave it on an optimistic note. And so I'll leave it here. I know I've gone over. So I'll apologize for going over. I'll apologize for missing words.
You don't need any apologies here, Steve. I always appreciate getting your opinion and your perspective, and especially, I think that's sound advice of people really needing to think for themselves and to try and evaluate all of these different pieces of data for what they are rather than how they're spun, right?
Exactly. That's all. And you can do it. Anyone that is fairly bright, and but we don't have a concept of what bright means anymore in this country because of it. But anyone that is capable of thinking for themselves is by definition, seriously, every bit as bright as anyone else out there. I mean, really, I've met, I don't know what your education is, but I've learned a hell of a lot from you. I've learned a hell of a lot from my doormen. I mean, people that think for themselves, and I'm sorry I call them doormen because they're immigrants from another part of the world, and they were, they had decent, very, very good jobs there. They don't in America right now. But I mean, anyone, advice I've gotten from doctors' secretaries have sometimes been much better than advice I've gotten from the doctors. Mm-hmm. And if you know how to think for yourself, you're smart enough to know everything else that's important. That I can assure you, because I'm not particularly bright. My great skill is thinking for myself. That's the only thing I can really offer people, that I think for myself. And that's the only, if you, believe that that's important, then you're you have a chance. If you don't, it's lights out for you, literally and figuratively. That's severe.
Well, for those that are interested, you have lots of awesome articles on your website, stephenleeb.com. And it really, you post a lot of this stuff and write about it in a very straightforward way that people can really understand it like that. And of course, your Twitter feed is at Leeb PhD as well.
Okay, I don't have much to do with my own Twitter feed, but I want to say this very honestly. I have to write about it in a straightforward way, because if it were really complicated, I would not know enough to write about it. I mean, that's really true. I'm not making that up. And everybody can become their own expert. And that's what I want people to be. Think for yourself, people. And then, if you can't do all the work yourself. It's impossible for me to, and I work at it, almost 24/7. That's the only edge I have over people, is that I'm sitting in front of 4 screens right now doing a lot of work. Different things on different screens. I work very, very hard. Mm-hmm. And that's all you need. Think for yourself and be willing to put the work in. And if you can't do all the work, be willing to accept that and find someone that knows a lot.
Or that can help you do some of that work and that filtering for you.
There's nothing wrong with that. I rely on everybody. Anybody that I meet that thinks for themselves has invariably taught me a lot, a lot. There's no more to be said. I mean, that's the message. And it all to that can be emphasized is that it's an existential message at this point in our existence, in humanity's existence. If we don't learn to think for ourselves, there's going to be no more of us. We won't have to worry about it anymore. Whether it takes 10 or 30 or a half hour, we will end as a species. I'm very much convinced of that. But again, that is somewhat speculation. You're not going to convince yourself by going to Google that that's the case. But I mean, you'll come close when you start looking at the shortages in commodities that exist, et cetera, et cetera. And, whatever. Okay.
Well, Dr. Leeb, I really appreciate you helping us link a lot of those dots here today. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I appreciate your time. I mean, I don't know what your education is. I have no idea. I've never asked. And I never do when I, look at people, but I know you're just a super bright guy and exceptionally so. And I learn from you constantly. Probably I learn more from you than you learn from me. And I'm not just saying that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm very humbled by that. Thank you.
Well, I'm humbled I'm humbled that you're humbled. I mean, really, thank you. So that's the story.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Leeb.
Thank you.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.